Hello everyone, my name is Mandeep. I'm a GMAT coach and founder of GMAT Mantra. In this video, we'll talk about what is GMAT, what are the sections tested in GMAT, and what is their scoring pattern. So first, what is GMAT? So GMAT is an entrance exam used by B schools to give admission to their programs. Majorly it is used for MBA and MIM programs. Now, this is one question that is there. What is the weightage or how much GMAT is important for the admission? So if we say that the overall admission process is out of 100 marks, we can say 40% is GMAT. So 40% weightage is given to your GMAT. Apart from that, it's your academic background and your experience and your extracurricular activities. So in the overall admission process, GMAT is 40%. Next, GMAT is an adaptive test. This is something special about GMAT, which is not there in other exams. So when we say adaptive means that questions have different weightages and according to the difficulty level. For example, now this is true for only two sections of GMAT. One is verbal and other is quant. These two are adaptive sections. So adaptive means that let's say the section start with one question. So let's say it's of 1 mark, okay, and it will have very least minimum difficulty level, okay, so it will be a relatively easy question. So it starts with 1 mark. So if you get that question right, next question will be of higher weightage. I'm just taking for an example, it will be of 2 marks and it will be of higher difficulty level. Now if you get the first question wrong, so for the first question you get 0 and the second question will be of lower weightage. It could be maybe of 0.75. Okay, so that's why if you get the question right, the next question will be of higher weightage and higher difficulty. But if you get the question wrong, you get 0 for that question and the next question will be of lower weightage. This is the meaning of adaptive. Now, if you look at the section tested in GMAT, there are majorly 4 sections, which is verbal, quant, IR, which is integrated reasoning, and AWA, which is analytical writing assessment. Still now, verbal and quant are the major sections which have, your admission is based on the score from these two sections. IR and AWA are not given a lot of weightage or importance, but still you need to get some score in these two sections. So 99% of the time is invested on verbal and quant. Probably for these two sections we just practice some questions and we are good to go because their scores are not important. Now let's talk about quant. So in quant there are 31 questions that you have to do in 62 minutes. Now if you look at the topics tested in quant, majorly you need topics till 10th class, majorly which is number system, inequalities, percentages, ratios, statistics, geometry, coordinate. So these are the common topics. Apart from these topics, there are 2 more topics, which is permutation combination and probability, which are normally we study after 10th level in the senior classes. So these are the only 2 topics from the senior classes. Rest all the topics that we have studied till 10th standard are tested. Now one important thing about GMAT quant is that it doesn't test you, on the things that all the other aptitude tests you on, which is your knowledge and in-depth calculations. So in most of the GMAT questions, you will not get in-depth calculations. Of course, calculations will be there, but they'll not be in-depth. Secondly, they'll not test you on a very GMAT questions on a very knowledge focus. The most important thing in GMAT quant is understanding. So what is the major problem that most students face in quant section is that they read the question and start solving it. And the specialty about GMAT quant is the language used in the quant questions. So what you have to do is when you do any question in quant, focus on understanding the question. Because as the question gets difficult, they don't start giving you a lot of calculations or in-depth concepts, knowledge of, they don't test you on the knowledge of concepts. The main thing is the language. You should have the habit of understanding or breaking the language. So when you're solving the question, invest probably if you have 2 minutes, invest 1 minute or 1.5 minutes in understanding the question. because solving the question won't take you time. Most of the questions can be done orally in GMAT, but you should know what exactly you have to find. Okay, so when you're if you're practicing, focus more on understanding the question rather than just read the question and start solving it. Don't do that mistake. That is the major mistake that maximum students do. Okay, now if we look at next section, which is verbal. So in verbal, there are 36 questions that you have to do in 65 minutes. So there are three sections that are tested in verbal. One is sentence correction, other is critical reasoning, and the third one is reading comprehension. Now in case of sentence correction, so there are some grammar concepts that you need to memorize. So again, over here also, you don't have to get into the depth of grammar, because GMAT doesn't test you on entire grammar. There are certain topics, I would say there are approximately 8 to 9 topics in which GMAT tests you on. And for those topics also, you don't need to get into the depth of the concepts. You just need to know the basics. Okay, the most important thing in sentence correction is again the right approach, how you approach the questions. Next, we have critical reasoning and reading comprehension. Both these sections are based on understanding, because what you're reading, are you able to comprehend that or not? That is tested in these two sections. So the best way to perform good in these two sections is we have to develop or focus on understanding what you are reading. So what I mean by understanding, normally if you see, our day-to-day reading is not understanding. We just read it and we just get over with it. Let's say you read some article in newspaper, and if I ask you what you read the next day, probably you will be say, oh, I don't remember. Because when we read, we are not reading with the intention of understanding. And for critical reasoning and reading comprehension, you have to develop the habit of understanding things. So how do you understand? A very simple thing. Whatever you read, convert that in your own language. Okay, so read a sentence, convert that in your own language. When I say your own language, convert it in your first language. For example, for me, my first language is Hindi. So whatever I read, I convert that into Hindi. Second, whatever you read, connect to the previous sentence. Because the next thing you have to work upon is the story. So one, whatever you read, convert that in your own words, and whatever you read, connect to the previous sentence. So when you connect to the previous sentence, you get the connection. So through these connections, we get story. And our mind can remember the stories. Our mind cannot remember the individual thoughts. Okay, so these are the skills tested in verbal. In verbal, 3 sections are there. In their weighted, the number of questions from these 3 sections are almost equal. So probably 11, 12 from each section. Sometimes there is 11 from sentence correction and 13 from critical reasoning. And sometimes they change, but the weightage is almost equal. May not be 100% equal, but almost equal. Now if I look at the scoring of these 2 sections, for quant and verbal, there are 2 types of scores. One is a raw score, other is a scaled score. So raw score is out of 60 for both quant and verbal. And for scaled score, it is 400 for quant and 400 for verbal. So when we talk about what is your score in GMAT, it is actually the combination of quant and verbal. 400 quant, 400 verbal, which makes it to 800. So your score is always out of 800. But if I look at the scoring on the raw score, it's pretty different for quant and verbal. Now if I look at quant, in quant, out of 60, 51 is the highest a student can get. 51 means 99 percentile. And when we look at verbal, 44 is 99 percentile. So mostly you will see if somebody's, let's say, got 710, 720, their quant score will always be higher than their verbal score. Because this is how they are scaled or the marks are given. So normally if somebody is at 720, you will see that they are getting around 4950 in quant and around 3637 in verbal. But if you look at the percentile wise, they are almost similar. For example, 4950 is around 80 to 90 percentile. Similarly, 3738 is around 80 percentile, 82 percentile. So percentile wise, they will be same, though there will be difference in the scoring. The next section is integrated reasoning. So if you look at integrated reasoning, so in integrated reasoning, there are 12 questions that you have to answer in 30 minutes. It's more of data interpretation. So there are different graphs or there are different information that you have to interpret, and based on that we have questions. So in integrated reasoning, scoring is from 0 to 8. So you can get anything between 0 to 8. Normally you need to get around 5 in this section. That's just more than sufficient. 5 or anything above 5 is more than sufficient. Next section is AWA, in which you have to write an essay. Okay, so you get around 30 minutes for this particular section, and you have to write an essay in those 30 minutes. The scoring of this section is from 0 to 6, and score increased by 0.5. So normally you get scores like 4, 4.5, 5.4, 5.5. Normally it is better to get around 4.5 and higher in this section. So if you look at the 4 sections, when you give the GMAT, there is an option of choosing the sequence in which you can give the test. Normally there are 3 sequences are allowed. First one is where you start with AWA, then IR, then there will be an optional break of 8 minutes, then quant, and then there is a 8 minutes break, and then verbal. This is one section and it's an old pattern. Next is you start with quant, then there is a 8 minutes break, then you have verbal, then 8 minutes break, then AW and IR. And the third one is you start with verbal, then 8 minutes break, then you start quant, 8 minutes break, and then AW and IR. Now, the most important thing that you need to take care of when you give GMAT, okay, just 2 things. One, always focus on the accuracy. When I say accuracy, okay, now normally when students give GMAT, when let's say they are doing verbal section, they want to, they have this mindset that they have to get all the questions right. That is not right, the right thinking or right assumption. You just need to get around 70 to 80% questions right to get to 700 plus score, okay. So normally I advise my students, let's say that you have 36 questions in verbal, focus on 30 questions, okay, and try to get maximum accuracy, because in aptitude test, accuracy is directly proportional to time invested, because most of the things are logical. So if you invest more time, you can get question right. But because we rush, we make a lot of silly mistakes. So if you can just avoid your silly mistakes, automatically your score will increase, okay. So I normally give them a target, okay, focus on 30 questions and try to get maximum accuracy. So if you get around 90% accuracy, let's say you get around 26, 27 or 28 right, so your score varies around 39, 40, 41. And for the remaining 6 questions, simply mark anything, okay. So first is focus on accuracy, okay. Second is that make sure that you attempt every question. Now there's a difference between attempting and getting the question right. Okay, so for example, in verbal, you just focus on 30 questions for first 60 to 63 minutes. And in the last 2 minutes, simply mark something for the remaining questions and complete the section. Because if you don't complete the section, you get negative. Otherwise, there is no negative in GMAT. Okay, so this is true for both quant and verbal. Focus on accuracy, number 1. Okay, you don't have to get all the questions right, but you have to attempt all the questions. Attempting means simply for the questions that are left in the last 2 minutes, simply mark something and complete the section. So this was a complete detail about GMAT. So if you have any queries, you can just comment on the, make a comment and I'll reply to it. Thank you.